Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Thursday, May the 23rd, 2024. Still looking at that reading from Acts 2 this past Sunday, the day of Pentecost, the story of Pentecost, how the Holy Spirit came like the sound of the rush of a violent wind and filled the house. So the original Greek, again, actually says it was a violent gusting wind. And with that, of course, the Holy Spirit literally blew into their midst, we're told. It came in such a impressive, dramatic, even mysterious way. And here's what's so interesting. The Latin word for spirit, spiritus, and the Hebrew word for spirit, ruach, as well as the Greek word for spirit, pneuma, all mean breath or wind. And what that means, of course, is that the Holy Spirit is literally the holy breath or the holy wind of God. And so it was that in that reading, therefore, the holy wind literally gusted into the apostles' lives, didn't it? Because just like the wind, any wind, the Holy Spirit cannot be seen either. We talked about that. It has no discernible form or substance, only its effects can be observed. In this case, the effect, at least the immediate effect, was that the apostles were suddenly empowered or enabled to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability, we're told. That is, in the midst of the sound like the rush of a violent gusting wind with tongues of fire dancing on their heads as well, the apostles were suddenly able to speak in a variety of foreign languages. Enough languages, apparently, that individuals from literally all over the then known world were suddenly able to hear them speaking in their own native tongues. And don't forget, these were regular everyday people, these apostles, not worldly or well-educated, nor had they taken any of those Rosetta Stone foreign language courses we see advertised on TV all the time either, I'm guessing. And yet, writes Steve Alberton, they were able to speak in these foreign languages so proficiently that Jews from the far reaches of the Roman Empire who had come to Jerusalem for the Jewish festival of Pentecost were able to understand them. And so that was the first and certainly the most obvious, if not impressive, gift of the Holy Spirit that day. But it didn't end there. Now, before we go any further, the initial reaction to this miraculous phenomenon, of course, was that the crowds began to accuse the apostles of being drunk, to put it bluntly, if you remember the rest of the story. To which Peter responded by getting up and saying, "Whoa, no, that's not true. This is not what it looks like. After all, it's only 9 o'clock in the morning, guys. No, what you're seeing happening here is actually what the prophet Joel had described for us a long time ago," said Peter. And then he quoted Joel, "In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit." In other words, ruach, pneuma, spiritus, my breath, my wind upon all flesh, and on your sons and your daughters, and they shall prophesy. Your young men will see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my spirit. The year was 1930, and it was the year of the Naval Conference in London. King George was to address the opening session. Radio was in its infancy, but through this media, the king's message was going to be carried around the world. But just before the king was to go on the air, Walter Vivian, a young engineer of the Columbia Broadcasting Company, discovered a broken wire in the transmitter. This was tragic. There was no time for repairs. The world was waiting to hear the message of the king. And the young engineer discovered what he had to do. He took a piece of broken wire in one hand and a piece of broken wire in the other hand. And for 15 minutes, Walter Vivian took 250 volts of electricity through his body so that the king's message might get through. Wonderful. The world is waiting to hear the message of the king, and the one way for that message to go through is as it's carried to a needy world through those who profess to be his disciples. Can, in other words, the king's message be transmitted through us? The great world's heart is aching fiercely in the night, writes David Parks, and God alone can heal it. God alone can give light. Then to speak languages, or to speak the message, to send the living word, and you and I are the ones who have heard and through whom the message has to go. James May talks about that power can be used in two ways. Again, we're talking about this unleashing of this power of the Holy Spirit. It can be unleashed or it can be harnessed. Drop an atomic bomb and just watch the raw power as it's unleashed. Or if you harness the power of the atom, it'll produce energy to make enough electricity for entire states. On the day of Pentecost, and on the day that the apostles were filled with the Spirit, the burst of power was evident, but the controlled release of that power caused the people of God to go great distances and to affect many lives as the power was made manifest in them. And finally, N.T. Wright, the famous New Testament scholar, talks about the task of Christians in the world. He says, many say, oh yeah, the Holy Spirit came in his place and to live with us, but for what purpose, he says. The Holy Spirit came to empower us to be God's life in the world. We are to do the work of God in the world. We are to be God to the world. We can't do that alone. The church is God's redemptive community in the world. Without you and without you joined with God's other children, God's work will not be done. He will not do it without us. He will not do it for us. And so again, the gift of the Holy Spirit was to empower people, ordinary people like you and me, to share this wonderful message with the world. Well, we're going to focus on the other reading that we had from this past Sunday from 1 Corinthians, talking about, okay, with the gift of the Spirit comes some specific spiritual gifts. So we'll talk about that in the next couple of days. Till then, take care. Bye.